The state of Florida, the great state of Florida, I should say, does not right now have a lieutenant governor. They have a governor, of course, you know, old Rick Scott. There is a job in Florida called lieutenant governor, but there is nobody in that job. The job is vacant. Help wanted. Last week, Governor Rick Scott is reported to have, quote, stared stone-faced at the Florida Press Corps' annual political roast in Tallahassee. He's said to have stared stone-faced while a reporter at that roast poked fun at the tension between him, Governor Rick Scott, and the lieutenant governor. The joke was supposed to be that the lieutenant governor was demanding respect, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, from Rick Scott. She was dressed up kind of Aretha Franklin style. It was supposed to be funny. Funny ha-ha. As the New York Times reports, quote, what nearly everybody in that room did not know was that the lieutenant governor, Jennifer Carroll, the first black woman to serve in the state's number 2 spot, what people in the room did not know is that she had only hours earlier signed a resignation letter while seated at a small conference table in her office and then handed it to the governor's general counsel. Florida's lieutenant governor had already resigned, and everybody joking about how difficult their relationship with didn't know that she was already gone. So the reporter's up there on stage vamping around as pseudo Aretha Franklin, portraying the give me respect lieutenant governor, but the lieutenant governor had already quit. The next day, when the news broke that she had quit, that she had resigned, Governor Scott issued a statement in which he said that the lieutenant governor had left elected office. She had left the number 2 office in the state so that her former association with a certain company would not end up, quote, distracting from our important work on behalf of Florida families. Well, the distracting company in question is this. This is the former Florida lieutenant governor. Then she was the lieutenant governor, and she's appearing in a PSA/ad for this distracting company. She did this a couple of years ago. In the 2 years preceding her appearance in that ad, the Florida lieutenant governor had a PR firm that reported that that group, that company, was the primary source of income for her firm. The group purports to be a charity for America's military veterans. They purport to be a group that helps veterans who are struggling with homelessness, among other things. The group is led by this man, whose title in the group is National Commander. His name is Jerry Bass. If you'd like to see a more recent picture of Jerry Bass, we have one here in the form of his mugshot. This was taken last week, the day after Florida's lieutenant governor resigned, because her association with him and his supposed veterans charity made her continuing in office as Florida's lieutenant governor an untenable prospect. Jerry Bass was arrested last week in Florida amid allegations that his group, supposedly raising money for veterans, was actually doing something else with almost all of the money that they raised. In all, nearly 60 people were arrested in this sting. It was a mass raid. Nearly 60 people arrested, 57 arrest warrants issued around this supposed veterans charity operating in Florida. The suspects stand accused of racketeering, illegal gambling, money laundering, and more. The IRS says this so-called veterans charity was a fraud. From the Associated Press, investigators say they found evidence of nearly $6 million in what appeared to be actual charitable donations to veterans, $6 million. But that is only about 2% of the nearly $300 million raised supposedly for veterans during that time. Investigators chasing the other 98% of the money that was supposedly raised for veterans found that the group instead lavished millions of dollars on charity leaders, spending on boats and beachfront condos and Maseratis and Ferraris and Porsches. A lot of it just turned up as cash parked in people's personal bank accounts. Law enforcement seized about 300 bank accounts containing almost $65 million in cash, as well as sports cars and other property. Since the raid a week ago, this supposed charity for veterans appears to have gone poof. The headquarters of the group in St. Augustine, Florida, described by reporters as sitting empty. Emails and phone calls to the organization just ringing off into the ether now with nobody responding. 57 people get arrested, and all of a sudden we can't find that group anymore. The press in Florida is reporting that part 2 of the giant multi-state investigation into this apparent fraud will be looking into the group's extensive political donations. Already, Florida's Republican Party say they plan to give $300,000 to real veterans' causes, to try to make good on the money that they took from this scheme that got several dozen alleged hucksters arrested. But in Florida, right, at least for now, this particular gig is up. This alleged scam is over. I mean, the boss's mugshot is on national TV. The Porsches and the Ferraris and the Maseratis are with the proper authorities now. The headquarters have gone dark. And good luck to any real veterans who actually did think they could depend on this group that promised to help them, but is now accused of taking that money for their own benefit instead. Florida's lieutenant governor has done precisely one interview since resigning in this scandal last week. She did an interview with the New York Times in which she told the New York Times, quote, "I believe I did a fantastic job." 2 years ago on this show, we covered the case of Bobby Thompson. At least that's who he said he was at the time. The man known as Bobby Thompson also ran a purported charity for veterans. This, I think, really was an early version of their website, the Bobby Thompson website. Come on, right? But yeah, fake Bobby Thompson and his charity, I guess, claimed to have chapters in dozens of states, all serving veterans. They raised money by calling up regular people on the phone and asking for money. Supposedly, they wanted to help Navy veterans in particular. Well, the Tampa Bay Times spent months investigating this guy and his supposed charity. He also was in Florida. They found that his supposed national headquarters, as well as most of his state chapters, were actually just one rented mailbox at a UPS store. Just like the charity that just got raided in Florida last week, Bobby Thompson cuddled up to all manner of political leaders, from President Bush to Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, several Virginia lawmakers. Once he got found out, they all tried to shake that money off themselves like it was a pack of fleas. I mean, when Bobby Thompson got found out, when the press exposed him for appearing to take money intended for veterans and using it to line his own pockets instead, fake Bobby Thompson split. He was a fugitive. He ran from the federal authorities for 2 years. Where he finally got caught was in Portland, Oregon. He's now been extradited to Ohio. He is slated to stand trial there next month under his real name, John Donald Cody. But when they got onto him, he was just another Florida guy accused of a nationwide scam built on the backs of our military veterans. And, of course, on our civilian desire to do something for them. But before you go thinking that this is just some weirdness that keeps crawling up out of Florida in particular, consider also the past couple of years in news out of Wisconsin. Before Scott Walker became governor of Wisconsin, his last job before that was being county executive in Milwaukee. And in Milwaukee, he helped organize a local supposed charity effort for veterans. It was an annual picnic at the Milwaukee Zoo, just a friendly local event for vets. Well, when Scott Walker made his executive decision of who to hand that work off to, when he made a decision to hand that work off to others, he made bad decisions. The guy on the right in the handcuffs was sentenced in December to a couple of years in prison for stealing $51,000 in money that was meant to go to veterans and their families. The other guy got the same prison term in January for the thousands of dollars that he stole, money, again, that was supposed to go to veterans. That money was there to be stolen because Americans gave that money as a way of saying thank you, we appreciate you, we want to do right by you, we are glad you are back. Saying that to the men and women who have been willing to fight for this country, even to sacrifice their lives for this country, if asked to do so. However you feel about the wars our country has fought in our lifetimes or our grandparents' lifetimes, the idea of welcome home is an idea that works in this country. We want to do right by our veterans. We want to make sure that they and their families have what they need. We want to make sure when they are promised things as a condition of them signing up, that those promises are kept. When, so help me God, the low-life grifters among us decide to exploit the way we feel about wanting to do right by veterans, when they undertake to tap that feeling in us, but then divert it so veterans do not actually get helped, really, what we need in those cases is a special place in hell so we can cram those people into it. Now look at this. This is news today. Just today, on the 10th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. One of the things we do as a country, as policy, is we offer grants to the children of service members who are killed in action. So if these kids lose a parent in the war, they can have help from the U.S. government to go to college. Only now those grants are being cut by more than a third. Here you go, kid. Sorry about your mom. Sorry about your dad. Go study up on the sequester. Last week, the Army announced it was suspending new grants for tuition assistance for soldiers themselves. Again, the sequester. And still, of course, we have a situation where troops returning from war are forced to wait in a very, 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 very long line for the benefits that we owe them and their families, the benefits that we promise them and for which they are eligible. We have nearly 900,000 veterans waiting right now just to hear back from the Veterans Administration. The average wait to hear back now is 9 months. It's even longer if you have just come back from Iraq or Afghanistan. With so many veterans now finally able to come home, we have not done what we need to do in order to accommodate them. So the wait times are getting longer and not shorter. The problem is getting worse. Wait times and cuts to college grants, these things, they're not a scam like the thing Rick Scott's lieutenant governor was tied up in. There's no one profiting from this national embarrassment themselves. But our strong feelings about doing right by veterans, about doing right by the kids of our soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, those strong feelings that we have about making that right, those feelings are being diverted. I mean, the programs are there. Those programs are the basis for the promises that we believe we are making to people who signed up to serve. But then the veterans are not actually getting helped. We are still made to feel that we are doing right on account of all the yellow ribbons and the stump speech call-outs to returning troops and the airline commercials where customers step aside so the soldiers can go first, right? If we mistake the emotional squee we get when we see those images as proof that we are actually doing right by veterans, then you and I are scamming ourselves as much as those grifters scammed their marks in Florida and Wisconsin and everywhere else. And there ought to be a special place in hell for messing that up. Joining us now is Congresswoman Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. She is an Iraq War veteran. She lost both her legs while serving as an Army helicopter pilot in Iraq. She later served as the Assistant Secretary for Public and Intergovernmental Affairs at the VA before becoming a member of Congress. Congresswoman Tammy Duckworth, it's great to have you here. Thanks for being here tonight.
It's great to be on. Thanks for having me, Rachel.
You can probably hear me getting all riled up, being pissed about people taking advantage of how we feel toward our veterans when they're not getting what we are promising them, either in the charitable context or in the programmatic context. Having served in the VA, being a veteran yourself, now being in Congress, how do you feel overall about how we're doing toward Iraq and Afghanistan veterans?
I think we could be doing so much better, Rachel. I do think we're doing better for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans than we did for Vietnam veterans, but that was a pretty low bar. The fact of the matter is we have over 1.2 million more veterans created as a result of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're simply not living up to the promises that we've made to them. We can do better. We're not providing the jobs that we need to get for them. We're not helping them with housing. Sequestration is going to cut homelessness programs. Our women veterans still need a lot of help. I think that we've done better than we have in a long time, but we've got a long way to go.
On the issue of the sequester and on the issue of the VA backlog, I know you served in the VA for a long time. Yeah. You've seen those problems up close. Do you feel like those are issues on which Congress sort of has an obvious way forward, where it is clear that Congress itself could do more to make those problems right? Or are these problems so complicated that congressional action isn't necessarily the clearest way forward?
You know, Rachel, on the backlog, I don't think it's a congressional action issue. I think it is simply a capacity issue. The VA is clearing a lot of the backlogs, but the problem is they're getting so many more new ones that it's taking them twice as long to get through them. That's not acceptable. The VA has talked for many years about the use of electronic records and the handoff of via electronic records of troops from DOD to VA. That still hasn't happened. It's better off than where it was, but it's still not where it needs to be. And now we have the DOD that has, because of sequestration, decided that they're going to end their portion of the software program that would allow them to be able to be in that seamless transition from DOD to VA. So whatever gains we've made in the last 3 or 4 years is now going away because of sequestration, and DOD is canceling their side of it.
Obviously, the specific program that I talked about in terms of the educational grant for service members' children, service members who were killed in the wars, the tuition assistance to service members right now in terms of their own education, those things getting cut are directly because of the sequester. Addressing the sequester would address those things. Do you think that they should be fixed, even if the rest of the sequester shouldn't be fixed? Should we privilege service members and veterans' needs like that, even if we can't fix everything else?
Well, I'm actually, Rachel, going to be one of the co-signers of a letter to the Secretary to ask him to please fix this issue with the tuitions, regardless of where sequestration is.
Okay. It is 10 years today from the date that we invaded Iraq. And you and I have talked a number of times about the overall politics of the Iraq war and the way that there's a real distance between those of us who didn't fight and those of you who did and who sacrificed so much and whose families have sacrificed so much. 10 years out, what do you feel like the lessons are that we still need to learn as a country in terms of how we got into that war and how we behaved once we were there?
I think the lesson that we need to learn here, Rachel, is the need for real honest discussion and real questioning of the information that's being given to you. I feel very strongly that in the run-up to Iraq, not only were the American people lied to, but members of Congress were lied to. And in fact, I call it a hostage situation. I think a lot of members of Congress voted for the war because they were being threatened and they had their patriotism questioned, as if you were not a true American if you wanted to know exactly what was going to be happening. I think that we're in a better place now than then. I hope that as we talk about Iran and Syria and other places where people want to just push American troops onto the ground, that we have a real honest discussion. And, Rachel, I've said this to you before, it's one of the reasons why I ran for Congress, because I'm going to be here along with my fellow veterans to say we're going to have a real discussion. When you sound the drum beats for war, let me tell you what it's going to cost. $1 trillion spent in Iraq, over 4,000 troops who've laid down their lives for this nation, tens of thousands wounded, and we will be caring for our veterans for the next 60 years. That's going to cost this country by 2020, that's 7 years from now, $8 billion a year just for the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. It is a cost that this nation is willing to bear to care for our vets, but let's have a true understanding of what war really cost this nation.
Congresswoman Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, an Iraq War veteran who knows that cost very much personally. Thank you so much for your time tonight. It's nice to see you tonight in particular.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks. All right. Coming up a little later on in the show, one of the things that has happened on this 10th anniversary of the Iraq War is that we have seen the, I guess, rehabilitation, you'd call it, of a lot of people who got us into the Iraq War in the first place. There's a little revisionist history that's being spun by them to make you not think badly about their decision that started that war in Iraq 10 years ago tonight. I have a feeling about that. That's coming up.